Hello, welcome to part 2. Okay then, so the Sovnarchy had these problems, and what's quite interesting is that when Khrushchev actually fell from power, his successor Brezhnev, he actually abolished the Sovnarchies and returned to a more centralised kind of control system than under Khrushchev. Now, what Khrushchev does, rather than do 5-year plans, which was Stalin's favoured model, he actually does a 7-year plan. Stalin died midway through his 5th 5-year plan. There was then a 6th 5-year plan, which was implemented, but then was proved to be unrealistic, which then led to 1959, a 7-year plan, which was then reduced to 5-year plans, just to confuse you all. The main thing to get from this 7-year, 5-year, whatever plan it was there was a move away from heavy industry. So as we said before, Stalin was all about steel production, coal being dug out, oil being refined or whatever. Khrushchev's model was much more based on lighter industry, consumer goods. So he wanted factories to produce things which people might want to buy, things like refrigerators, cookers, household items basically. He promoted the plastic industry, chemicals, light industry, all much more kind of modern kind of stuff than happened under Stalin. So he was modernising the economy, modernising what was being produced to fit in with the Western powers who at this time were producing, more chemicals, plastics, light industry, consumer goods, and also to improve the working conditions and living conditions of Russian people. Russians, like everybody else, they want the latest goods and gear, basically. And Khrushchev genuinely believed that socialism was the best way to run the country. But he believed that the people had to see the benefits. And if people didn't see material benefits from the system of government they lived under, then they'd become unhappy and cause problems. So he was very keen for goods which people wanted to buy, again, to try and improve their living and working conditions. Again, very much different to what happened under Stalin, who basically couldn't really care, did he, about what the people thought particularly. He also planned to try and develop the less developed areas of the Soviet Union as well. So try and make sure there wasn't just the big cities of Moscow, Leningrad areas that were being industrialised, but actually some of the areas of Russia which had very little industry, to try and develop these areas as well of the Soviet Union. So so they could exploit more of the natural resources, and also try to spread some of the wealth and stuff from industrialisation to areas like Siberia, for example, Eastern Russia, places around like Vladivostok and those sorts of parts of the Soviet Empire. And interested under Khrushchev, he actually met all the targets which he was set, and they weren't as unrealistic targets like Stalin's. And actually, as well under Khrushchev, we actually saw quite a sustained period of economic growth which did not then come to Russia again after his downfall for the entire period. So the economic growth under Khrushchev was kind of the last significant economic growth which the Soviet Union had. It then kind of stagnated under Brezhnev, and then it all kind of collapsed and went horribly wrong under Gorbachev and the downfall of the Soviet Union. So here on this table are just some of the targets which he met, and you can see he actually trounced some of them. So like gross output of producing consumer goods, actually factories, cookers and stuff, 162% was the planned. He achieved 160, so he was near his damning there. Steel production, he produced a lot more than what was proposed. Same for oil production. The amount of electricity was much greater, so most Russians by this stage would have had electricity. So again, people can feel some of these material benefits from the Khrushchev era. And then we look at housing and living standards and working conditions as well. Because remember, conditions under the Tsars have been really poor. There are a few laws put in so that women and children couldn't work at night and stuff. Conditions were really poor under Lenin. They remained poor under Stalin. Remember that video you had to watch about Magnitogorsk? Everything was about producing heavy goods, wasn't it? Living and working conditions were not particularly important to them. There were some significant improvements under Khrushchev. So housing standards. Under Stalin, as we said before, it was a very low priority. Okay, 25% of people in Moscow lived in communal dormitories. In other words, they shared their living spaces. So you might have 2 or 3 families living in, a room the size of our classroom, say, or perhaps slightly bigger. People would share bathrooms and all this kind of business. So there's no privacy under Stalin's Russia or what had gone before. And again, through those sources you had to read from the Tsars, again you had people sharing beds, didn't you, and sharing rooms and things of that nature. So again, really, really poor. Khrushchev was quite keen that people should live in their own individual flats, and a massive housing program of flats began under Khrushchev. These flats have got a certain name in Russia, which I can never know what they're called, but they're basically translated as Khrushchev flats. And they're still around in Russia today. You can still go to many parts of Russia and see these kind of flats under Khrushchev. They're pretty dilapidated these days. They were built quite quickly and quite cheaply. So they weren't particularly great standard when they were first built. But at least now you had one family per apartment. And so people for the first time had privacy. They had some of the mod cons like bathrooms that were inside the house, for example. Heating might not always work properly, but at least it was there. And this is the type of flats they saw, pretty ugly kind of flats. Again, you saw like different versions of these in Britain in the 1960s, many of which have been pulled down since. But they were a big step up than what happened beforehand. So Khrushchev did have a genuine concern for people's living conditions. In terms of working conditions, again, Khrushchev was quite keen to improve people's working conditions. And again, the housing and working conditions fit into this general belief that Khrushchev had, that for the Soviet Union to survive and for communism to survive, the people had to see the benefits. If people didn't see the benefits, then had nothing to, give to support the regime. So in 1956, a minimum wage was introduced into the Soviet Union to try and improve people's wages, obviously, therefore their spending power, therefore they could try and make their lives better. Better pensions were offered for state workers. Okay, there's a new 7-hour working day as well. Healthcare saw a big investment as well, and every child had the opportunity to go to a secondary school as well. So again, these are significant improvements than what had gone on previously under Stalin and then previously to the Tsars and stuff of that nature. A real investment being made into people's living and working standards, things like pensions and reducing the working day. The Tsars had tried to reduce the working day, hadn't it, to 11.5 hours or something in 1907 or something like that. Well, now it's gone down to 7. So again, this is something which you did not do under Stalin. Stalin, you worked till you died, basically. So significant improvements being made. And as a consequence of this, people actually had money to spend. Disposable incomes rose by 4%. So people could now start to buy some, what you might see at the time being luxury goods. Things like refrigerators and televisions as well were beginning at this time. So things were improving, but they were far, far behind the West. There are some figures I had somewhere. This is a bit later, like in the 1970s, where there's something like, I don't know what the exact figures were now, but the number of houses in Britain where there was a TV was like 90% or something, and in the Soviet Union it was like 20%. So they were way, way behind the West in terms of consumer goods. But at least Khrushchev had seen the need for consumer goods, and he had begun the process of trying to deal with that issue. Okay, and as we've got here, I did these figures somewhere, I knew we'd have them somewhere. So by the time he fell from power, 0.05% of people owned a car. I'm not sure what percent that was in Britain at the time, but I imagine it would have been a bit higher than that. 0.8% owned a TV and 0.4% owned a fridge. Again, these are way behind Western figures at this time. But at least there's some progress being made. And it is a difference between Khrushchev and between Stalin, because Stalin didn't really care about living and working conditions particularly. Khrushchev did, and as you can see, there were some changes made. So from that, you should get in some of that stuff on there, and then there's a final sheet in your workbooklet on this where you have to try to compare Khrushchev with previous rulers, Stalin and his predecessors. So if you can use this information and any other reading that you've done or additional info that you've found to complete that, And then that is basically the industry done. Okay, so you just need to think about in general what are the similarities and differences. And what we'll do during this week, either in lesson time or in Teams meetings, it depends how your session kind of falls. We'll spend some time discussing all this industrialisation, where the similarities lie and where the differences lie.